Before we get started with this week's episode, I just want to warn you that we talk about some difficult stuff this week, including suicide, mental illness, and the mistreatment of human remains. Hello and welcome to Experience, our new weekly podcast that aims to demystify human behaviour, one news headline at a time. Luckily, you do not need to put up with my cod psychology, because we are joined each week by a genuine doctor of psychology. His name is Peter Kinderman. This week, we've got some difficult topics that we're going to be discussing. So we're going to start off relatively gently by talking about some identity change and also about where you're from and the importance of that. We're going to talk about our resistance as a species to address climate change when we discuss the wildfires that are happening in France. We're also going to talk about the awful story that has been coming from the courts, the sentencing of Robert Bush over his shonky funeral practices. We're going to be talking about the importance of death rituals and why, as a species, we need them so much. And lastly, we are going to be paying tribute to Bill Oddie, whose death was announced after last week's episode. And Peter, you're going to be doing a rendition of the Funky Gibbon.
Thank you, Peter. I wasn't aware of that, but obviously that's on my repertoire. Yeah, great.
Brilliant. I look forward to it. This week, whilst I had a good week, it was a really busy week. Each year, about 20 of my in-laws descend on us and they camp in the garden and we have a jolly old time with lots of guitars and we invite our neighbours in as well, which sounds a bit like a Tom Lear, the Irish ballad, which is a very macabre song. But when our neighbours came over, one in particular also thinks that she is a Mancunian. My in-laws hail from where you are, and I thought you could adjudicate, Peter, being a Mancunian yourself. And my neighbour, she is from Wilmslow. Manc or no Manc?
As in, if you
is she a
hail
Mancunian?
from Wilmslow?
Yes, they were adamant that she did not qualify.
Well, so when I moved up to Manchester, because I wasn't born here, it took me probably about 25 years to come to terms with the fact that what I regard as Manchester contains a place called Salford and a place called Trafford. And if you speak to people who are definitely Mancunians, they say that Salford isn't Manchester. And then it relates to Manchester City and Manchester United. And then the Manchester City people say that it's Manchester City because they're from Salford, which makes no logical sense at all. So I find the idea of Mancunian identity particularly confusing because you can step across the road and apparently you're in a different, planet.
And actually, to be fair, my in-laws are Salfordians.
Right. Well, that's another wrinkle in the complexity. And the answer, of course, is it's up to each individual person to define their own identity. And if she thinks that she's a Mancunian, then that's what she is. And also, if she thinks she's a Mancunian and in fact she's not, it would be rude to tell her the facts. So just let her continue to believe that she's a Mancunian and say yes. That would be my solution. In fact, saying yes is usually the best solution to most questions.
Okay, brilliant. I've got my answer. Thank you for that. I knew you'd come up with the right one. Also, when they were here, one of my nephews, his girlfriend, is expecting a baby in quite short order. So it's quite exciting because next year we're going to go back to having 3 generations, which we haven't had for a number of years now. Now, there was a bit of a debate about names, but not the baby's name, about what the grandparents are going to be called. So I hadn't realised just kind of what a hot potato that actually can be. I know that my stepson's grandmother calls herself Mimi, and one of my best friends at school, her grandfather was Ogre. But actually, some people are really resistant to that kind of grand anything, aren't they?
Yeah, and this is about what names, what words mean in terms of your identity, and the whole shtick of grandparents comes with some sort of Chaucer medieval idea of doddery old folk with sticks. So the minute you say, I'm going to attach a word to your identity that means doddery old bloke with stick, then you don't like it. I mean, the truth is that thanks to modern science, people in their 50s, 60s and 70s can go skydiving if they want to. And so they don't fit the medieval image of somebody just waiting for death to tap them on the shoulder with the scythe. But it comes with that image. And if it does, and you don't like that image, then sure, choose a different name. Personally, I don't have anything against children and grandchildren calling you by your name. So just use your name. That's it.
Ooh, controversial. When my children have the temerity to use my name, I'm like, you've only got one mother. There are a million Hillarys in the world.
Again, identity, you see, it's about the identity that it signals for you. But my point is, if the concept of grandparent or grandfather or grandmother conveys old, frail, not really with it in the world, not really going to gigs at the Aviva anymore, then you would reject that identity. I mean, the other point of view, I suppose, would be absolutely accept that identity and go to a Fatboy Slim concert with grandfather on the T-shirt. That'd be the other way to do it.
Well, and indeed,
most of the people at Fatboy Slim concerts are grandfathers in my personal experience. But
I have to say, pretty much every gig I go to, which tells you quite a lot about my choice of music, and every festival, most people are wearing grandfather gig T-shirts, that's for sure. So will you grandfather it up, or will you be Peter?
I will leave it enigmatic and wait for people to ask, and then I will choose how to reply on the basis of what impression I want to give them. That's the way to do it.
I like
be subtle and be reserved. When they say, Peter, are you a grandfather? I'll think, and then I'll say, that's an interesting question. Why do you want to know? And they'll go, well, it's just a blah, blah, blah. And I'll go, what difference would it make to your understanding of me? And by then, hopefully, I've diverted them away from the question.
This is why psychologists get a bad name. You know this, don't you?
Yeah. But you do it with a charming smile at the same time, and then you get away with it.
Well, you do have a particularly charming smile, so that's good. They also all were talking about the wildfires that are raging across France whilst they were here, my in-laws. And one of them raised quite an interesting concept, which I don't know whether it is indeed true, because it is widely thought that the now under control fire in France, last week's fire in Suffolk, and of course the fires that now have really taken hold in Greece are climate change induced. And one of my in-laws said, why is it that humans cannot care about people who have yet to be born? And is that right? I mean, what's going on there psychologically? Why can't we get to grips with this?
Well, that's a very interesting question. And it's something that I've thought about both going back in time and going forward in time. So on a little bit of research that I've been involved with, we were looking at records of people in psychiatric asylums in the Victorian period. And the rule is it's 100 years. So you can look at private records of people that are 100 years old. And you think, well, that's maybe 4 generations. But you can kind of imagine people that you sort of know about from them. But the sort of intensity of looking at their personal details and invading their privacy has faded 100 years in the past. And of course, we can dig up Richard III's bones, and we can, although we should do it delicately, we can go and look at mummified Egyptians. And so the sensitivity to people in the past fades a little bit. And yes, it's difficult to imagine, in 8 billion years' time, when the Earth gets swallowed up by the sun, whatever humans have evolved into. I don't have a great deal of worry about those entities. I do worry about, for instance, my children after my death. So you're right, there's almost a bell curve of consideration. And I think that they're right. It does fade as we look into the future. And we kind of go, oh, it'll get sorted. And I can't really engage with the humanity of these people. And I think that's a problem. Yes, I think that it means that our capacity to invest in sacrifices now for things that will only benefit people whose parents haven't yet been conceived is quite a challenge. And that's what we have to do, clearly. I think there's a potential solution, and I think not only scientists, but I think politicians are moving towards this sort of solution. And I'm afraid it doesn't fit well with the plutocrats and right-wing politicians, which is, it's about principles, which instead of saying, should I buy this bottle of fizzy water and then throw it away? Should I make this ChatGPT search or should I not? The question is, what sort of principles do I want to live by? And do I want to live according to principles that has no consideration for the future? And I think it's much easier to answer that second question than to think about, how is my decision now impacting on the life of somebody who has not yet been born? I can act according to my principles now, and I can always act according to my principles now. So in a way, you don't have to think about those people who are not yet born. What you have to do is think, how do I want to live my life? What's a reasonable way to conduct myself right now? What's the right thing to do about this decision at this moment?
But what I hear time and again, and not just from older people, but even from younger people these days, is just how futile it is to even bother doing anything on a personal level to affect climate change. What could governments do to try and convince people that, yes, their actions do make a difference?
So I think that's right. I think people do often feel futile. People feel futile in the face of all sorts of things like climate change and other big sort of political decisions. It brings me back, just as a diversion, it brings me back to somebody whose writings I think genuinely changed my life, which is Albert Camus, the existential philosopher. And one of the things to try to be very, very brief about him, his basic argument was the whole of life is absurd. There's absolutely no point to anything. And the question that probably was central to him getting the Nobel Prize was, why don't we just kill ourselves now? There's absolutely no point to anything. And his answer to that was, we make the point. So the answer to climate change is that you could look at it. It's not exactly a glass half full, glass half empty thing. It's again acting to your principles. It's again saying, in the realization that we live in a universe that fundamentally doesn't care, we have to do the caring. So it comes down to, at every point, at every moment, as much as you can, make the decisions that are the ones that you believe to be right, that meet your goals and meet the goals of making other people safe and content. And so the thing that you can do about climate change, yes, you can look at climate change and think, Elon Musk is controlling the political agenda, and Donald Trump has his, I was going to be rude, but he has whatever digit sort of serves him in the role of a finger on the buttons. But what we can do is we can make sure that the decisions that we make right now are the decisions that we're proud of. So I think that governments should, and I think they do, I think this is part of what the Nudge Unit does, and it uses psychology, principled psychology to this end, is to remind people that what they can do is make the right decision every time. When you have a bottle of water in your hand, put it in the recycling bin and not dump it on the street. When you are faced with two objects of reasonable equivalence, buy the one which has a lower carbon footprint. When you're thinking, should I leave the central heating on and open a window, or should I turn the central heating off if I'm going to open the window, then turn the central heating off and open the window. And we can make all of these decisions ones that we can make. And that turns it around from saying we are utterly futile in the face of climate change to saying absolutely not. You can literally make every decision you make one that you can be proud of.
I think that's a really good approach, and it really is an entirely good antidote to the man who I'm going to describe as the octogenarian in the White House. I've been thinking about this, and I think that's possibly the biggest insult I can give him, because we know he doesn't like getting old. So the octogenarian, and his whole, drill baby drill agenda, the crassness of it all, and just the bombast is unbelievable. Have you heard Mia Mottley, the Barbadian Prime Minister, speak on climate?
No.
She is so erudite. She spoke to COP26. In fact, we're going to put the link in our show notes. She is fire, this woman. She's like a rock star Prime Minister. Unbelievable. She holds people to account. And I actually find her really inspirational. In fact, actually, we'll give you an extra treat as well. She took Zainab Badawi, the BBC journalist, to task once as well over investment from China in Barbados. So they're both brilliant clips. But Mia Mottley, she's an absolute inspiration, absolutely. So moving on then, as a nation, we're not really very good at talking about death, and we find it really hard. And there was an absolutely disgusting story last week. Mm-hmm. It was a sentencing hearing of Robert Bush. He's the funeral director caught up in the awful story where he had to plead guilty to 67 criminal charges, 30 of which I think were around the improper burial and treatment of dead bodies. It's a really despicable story. And when you heard the victims and their families, speaking at the trial, they talked about being in a black hole, about being under a black cloud, about feeling just violated and enraged. It was such a visceral testimony that we were getting from these people. Why are death rituals and the sort of the treatment of people who have passed, why is that so important to our culture and to society, Peter?
Well, first of all, it always has been important. And when archaeologists look back at the trace remains of humans and pre-humans back in history, one of the clear markers that they talk about is the way in which bodies are treated. And when there is some care and attention, when there are grave goods, when the graves are prepared, that's a sign of increasing sophistication, increasing civilization, but I think also an increasing recognition of the identity of the individual and their relationship with the people in their clan and their group and their family. And of course, the idea that a person's physical identity and their physical body is the marker and in a sense, it's literally the embodiment of their identity. So to mark that and to recognize that person's role in your life and the respect that you show to them as an individual is reflected in the respect that you show to their body. And it's universal. And the contempt that we have for people who themselves treat bodies with contempt, you see in war and war crimes and mutilation of bodies, you see it in people discarded, you see it in the horror that we feel when we see a dead body abandoned. And yes, the idea of treating loved ones disrespectfully is horrific. I think in this particular case, there's a little added nuance, which is that he went through the pretense of treating people respectfully, yes. and that also was a lie. And so the idea of handing somebody respectfully in a beautiful urn with what is apparently their dead child's ashes in it, and it turned out that he hadn't even picked up the ashes yet from the crematorium. That shows a disrespect for the person who is still living. So contemptible. And like I say, all cultures have death rituals. We all as individuals need death rituals. And when the people close to me die, I don't want to just go, I'd forgotten about them and let's move on. That doesn't reflect the importance that person has in my life. So,
and people go through different processes, don't they? So for me, when my mum died, I didn't want to think about the date that she died, to the point where I went through my entire pregnancy of my third child, not realising that their due date was my mother's death date, until my sister texted me on that morning to see how I was in light of my mother, at which point I had a massive meltdown and thought I was very stupid. But it's continued. It's not something I want to hold on to. I try and think about my mum all the time and my dad, but I don't go and visit their grave. Whereas my husband's family, they're very different. They do make those ritualized trips to see where their loved ones are laid and memorialized. So we do have different processes, don't we?
We do. And one of the reason why I was kind of frowning and humming and interrupting you, sorry, was that I think one of the things that sociologists, ethnographers, and of course psychologists do is they start to talk about the stages of grief and the proper way to grieve. And I don't think that that's terribly useful. I think people grieve in their own way. Some people would genuinely find it morbid to have reminders of somebody, but nevertheless they love the person very much and they're constantly thinking about them and they're reminded of them when they choose to remind themselves of them rather than due dates. And I think that due dates, you see, it slipped in. The Victorians, I went to Dunham Massey, I think I went to, and where there was quite a beautiful, quite large, about 30 centimetre square, sort of raised sculpture made from hair. And it didn't really specify whether it was hair of a dead loved one or just hair. But you think, to my eyes, that seems a little bit morbid. Maybe it was then, but maybe it was just the way that they were. Anyway, my point is, I don't think we should impose our expectations of how other people should grieve onto them. I think people grieve in the way that makes sense for them.
There are some cultures where they mummify the bodies and they dress them up each year and parade them around. I mean, we don't tend to have particularly good outward grieving, do we? We're not known as a nation for those that sort of embrace talking
No.
about death. And
I do. I mean, it's related to the climate change thing. I do myself personally quite like the idea of remembering that I'm mortal. I think my arrogance, especially because, as I think we've established, I fit the profile of the people who should be arrogant, or shouldn't be arrogant, but are. It's easy to imagine I'll live forever and, insouciant and all this sort of stuff. But of course, I do need to remind myself I'm going to die, and it would be sensible of me to arrange my affairs in the knowledge of the truth. So to be reminded that I'm going to die, to be reminded that my lifespan is finite, is probably a good thing. I don't think that's morbid. I don't think it leads to sadness or crazy responses. I think it leads to exactly the same as I said over climate change. Make sure that every decision I make is an appropriate one. Given that, I don't happen to have a death's head ring on me, but if I was a Victorian gentleman, I might have, or a skull on the top of my cane or whatever. And that would help me walk into a pastry shop and think, yes, watch out for the old heart. Maybe I won't have a chocolate eclair. It would actually help me make good decisions right now in the light of... So I think reminding ourselves of people who've been before us, reminding ourselves of the fragility of life, reminding ourselves of where we are in the natural world is probably a good thing. And therefore, the rituals of grieving and death are important. I think the people that I love. Those people are real human beings with real bodies. And no, I don't want them treated disrespectfully when they die.
there are a growing number of billionaires, and may I say men, who are trying to live forever. It absolutely is astonishing to me because, like you said, we kind of need to die if we're going to let the next generation flourish, don't we? I mean, there is something fundamental about coming to terms with our own finite end. What do you think is going on psychologically with the billionaires who are trying to just keep living for as long as possible?
I don't gamble because maybe I'm a little bit kind of, a bit weird, but it looks to me that if lots of people are making lots of profit out of scamming off 5% over every bet made, then chances are I'm just going to give them 5% of whatever the turnover is. So I don't want to do that. It seems highly unlikely that I'm going to win a bet. It seems even more unlikely that somehow I'm going to be the first person to beat this dying thing, because plenty of people haven't thus far, I think. And I think if I'm going to put my effort in anything, I'm going to put my effort into having a good life rather than a miserable, everlasting life. If I was wealthier, then I would use my wealth to try to, well, actually, I wouldn't use my wealth to try to make me have a particularly happier life, because I don't think money was going to make much difference to me now. I'd use my money to help other people have a happier life. But I'd probably do that in the expectation.
That's why we like you.
Yeah. Well, people could have happier lives, but they probably can't have everlasting lives. So I think they're investing their money in the wrong place. I think their chances of success are so blindingly close to zero as to be not worth investing in. I think it's a stupid investment. But then I look at these people and I look at how their PR companies have said, this man is a genius. And I think, well, I'm only basing my opinion on what he says and what he does. And neither of those things make me think he's a genius. And if he's going to try to live forever, that's not very genius.
Yes, well, we all know who you might have been thinking about just then, about the genius, the trillionaire, perhaps, which is a scary situation. But you work, don't you, with a cemetery in Manchester, don't you, on a project around people passing and the ceremonies and what should happen?
I've just been invited to join a little project. It's just starting up. So Manchester's Southern Cemetery is very large. It's not the largest in Britain, but it's huge. Victorian growth of Manchester, blah blah. And so they set out a massive cemetery just very near where I live, and it was built Victorian style with a number of chapels which have not fallen into disrepair, but they've fallen into disuse. So I've joined a group of local residents who are planning to revivify the chapel and think about death rituals, and not exactly religious, but the spiritual aspect of death, and thinking about what we can do to make the chapels on the cemetery useful for people in terms of those death rituals, but also the history, and also the art, and also the nature. Manchester Southern Cemetery has won awards for being a nature reserve because, with the exception of a few sticking up bits of stone, which birds like to sit on, it's a beautiful, open, natural space. So, yes, I'm getting involved in that. Early days, but the City Council seem to be positive and basically saying, we have these beautiful chapels, tell us what you would like to do with them. So that's what we're going to do.
So about 20 years ago, when my mum died, a few days later, my best friend's mum also died, which was, for us, at least we had each other who knew what the other one was going through, I think, because we were a bit younger then. And my mum had a full Catholic ceremony. She worked ecumenically in the community quite a lot. And I think there were like 7 or 8 celebrants on the altar. It was a full-on service. Whereas my friend's mum was not religious. And what they did was for their sort of ceremony, because she donated her body to science as well. So they had a gathering in the pub where they brought a guitar and they had a photo wall and people sang songs and told stories about her, which was really amazing. And actually it really opened my eyes to how you can create your own tribute. I mean, following on from that, you have a ceremony in the cathedral in London, the one on Southwark, I think it's Southwark Cathedral, where all the doctors go as well to celebrate the life of those whose bodies have been donated. And then your body is then released about a year later, and you go for a second funeral there where you've actually got the body present. So it was quite a drawn out process by donating your body, but just the fact that you could still do a service at that sort of quite soon after the death and make it relevant without a body and also without all the trappings of religion, I found really interesting at the time.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, when I was younger, because my parents were very religious and because I'm not, I thought that these things in our lives which have become ritualized and memorialized, because from my parents' perspective, they were always imbued with religion, and specifically in their case, a theistic religion. I think for many, many years, I kind of assumed that ceremony and meaning and even spirituality and religion were kind of the same thing, so I rejected it. But I've come to realize that the understanding that this person's identity is more than their physical remains and was more than their physical remains, and that their identity and their impact on other people as an abstract concept is worthy of commemoration and celebration. It is just simply true. And you don't, in that humanistic perspective, you don't have to say, yes, well, of course, what my father would have done at this point is to say, yes, and that's exactly what I mean by the immortal soul. And no, you go, no, it's just this person who was meaningful to other people, their existence mattered, their identity was their identity, and we can celebrate that without it invoking people with beards who look suspiciously white and middle class sitting on clouds.
Indeed. Okay, so that brings us to our final headline this week. It is the fact that Bill Oddie has died, aged 85. He started off as a comedian. He went to Cambridge University, to Pembroke College, just down the road from your old college yourself, Peter. He was a member of Footlights. Were you a member of Footlights? No.
So, far too socially anxious for that sort of nonsense.
Okay, all right. And he wrote lots of songs before joining the Goodies, and then obviously became, in everyone's mind, a loved one because he hosted Springwatch and brought us great good feelings, not only from laughter and communication in that way, but also through our shared love of nature. But he was very open. He was one of the first people to really come out and be open about his mental health struggles. So he had depression and bipolar, I think, was his diagnosis. And he talked about the disconnect he had with his mum. He was brought up by his dad and a grandmother, I think, because she had schizophrenia. Now, is there a genetic link to those sorts of illnesses?
Almost certainly not really, and trivially. So this is a whole big thing, and we could have many, many podcasts about both the naming of people's distress and our theories of genetics. My personal view is that these names. So there are experiences that we have. So people sometimes have hallucinations. People sometimes find themselves losing touch with reality. People certainly very often get anxious, and people certainly from time to time become depressed. So these phenomena that we all experience, they're very real. I think as a society, we've struggled with a number of things. We've struggled to give names to these things, and we've struggled to understand them. And I think it genuinely is a profound sadness in my life that the framework that we've used to understand human suffering has been the framework of illness. Because what then happens is two things happen. We take these experiences, and instead of saying, tell me about your episodes of sadness, tell me why you are becoming sad. There's a bloke I won't name because I'm going to ridicule him, but he's in the House of Lords, and he was talking about how 80% of human misery can be explained by depression. Well,
Okay.
that doesn't even make sense if you're a linguist, let alone if you're a behavioral scientist trying to explain. A word for misery, it can be explained by the existence of another word for misery. It's not. The only way that you can possibly understand that statement is to say, we understand the feelings of depression to be a biological illness that we will call major depressive disorder, or schizophrenia, or bipolar disorder, or whatever, which is in itself some sort of abnormality of the physical structure of your brain causing it. And I don't think there's any evidence for that at all. I think this is what I did in my career. I think the evidence that the names that we use to describe so-called mental illness relate coherently to discrete entities that can be identified in different people or in the same person across time is almost totally lacking. It just seems to be a heterogeneous mix of distress that bubbles up for different people for different reasons in different circumstances, and we genuinely struggle to name these experiences. The second layer of it, which is that these experiences should fall into the medical realm as opposed to the spiritual realm or the sociological realm, or the realm, in my case, of psychology, of things have happened to me in my life that have caused me to become very depressed. Things have happened to me in my life that have caused me to doubt myself as a human being. Things have happened to me in my life that have caused me to lose touch with the way that I understand the reality of the world outside. I've gone into myself. Things have happened to me in my life that have caused me to rely on substances that have taken me away from engaging with the world in the way that evolution has intended my eyes and brain to engage with it. Those questions are lost, and instead the question become, which diagnosis best fits your presentation of symptoms? Can we attach a label to it? Can we assume without evidence that there's an illness behind it, and then treat that illness with drugs? All of that I'm basically contemptible about.
But there is
Is
some...
it, so the question of it, as in does schizophrenia exist as it's a loose collection of experiences that many people have. So even if it existed, then the question is genetics. I don't think genetics code for illnesses, they code for proteins. Is there any evidence that some genetic differences between us make us more or less vulnerable to problems that affect our mental health? Several thousand genes have been identified, each of which might convey a tiny, tiny risk. But that's about as far as the science has got. And I think that puts us plumb back in, everybody's a bit different and we all have our vulnerabilities.
I found learning about schizophrenia when I started doing my master's conversion to psychology really interesting. The thought of hearing voices, the thought of things, seeing things that weren't there. Actually, as a child, I found that the thought of that happening to me to be very scary. And I think in this country, we've really approached that kind of experience of one of, oh, keep back, is it contagious? I'm scared of that. I don't want that. No, they must be ill. But in other cultures, people celebrate hearing voices, or they talk about people helping them with the voices that they hear.
Absolutely. So
it's not feared.
So when I was active in the British Psychological Society, we wrote a very good, let me edit it and did it again, very good report on schizophrenia, on when people lose touch with reality and when people hear voices and have other problems. And it's excellent, and people should look it up, and I think it's great, and I think it's still honest and true and is I think is both honest and true and scientifically valid, and is a counterpoint to the mental illness is an illness kind of narrative. We launched it in the Quaker Meeting House just opposite Euston Station, and one of the other speakers, not me, commented on the fact that in religion, of course, you spend quite a lot of time trying to hear the word of God, and then we were writing a report on hearing voices. Just as a note, one of the things that I did last weekend was I went to a festival, a little urban festival called Green Island Festival. It was great fun, community garden centre in Manchester. And I can tell you that there are a lot of people in the world, probably partly because of the narrative of schizophrenia being a terrible illness, who are really scared of seeing things and hearing things that aren't real. There's a whole load of people who are quite prepared to eat magic mushrooms and really enjoy hearing things and seeing things, and then give long and complicated explanations for how brilliant it is when you're trying to concentrate on 808 state.
Well, there we go. Do you want to comment on your own partaking of those mushrooms? Did you have a mushroom ragu that
I
day?
did not.
Okay, lovely.
I kept my brain pure.
It brings us back to Bill Oddie. He made us laugh. There's great evidence, isn't there, about just how beneficial laughter is, but not just to us in terms of all the endorphins it releases, but actually it's really important for social cohesion. Can you tell us a bit about that?
It absolutely is. One of the fascinating things about laughter is that when psychologists have played very, very funny clips to people in groups, they laugh. When they played the clips to people on their own, absolutely no facial expressions whatsoever. They just sit there and watch it. And when you ask them afterwards, how funny was it? They go, absolutely hilarious, but you don't move. So laughter is clearly a social signal to other people. People just simply don't laugh on it. I mean, they do. This is a kind of like hyperbole, but the frequency of laughter.
Clearly not really.
Let's do it scientifically. You are massively more likely to laugh, smile, and make other social interactions with people when watching or engaging with something funny when you're in company than if you're not. This is why they put canned laughter on comedy series. When people see comedy shows without canned laughter, people don't find it as funny. When they're watching those shows on their own, they don't then reciprocate back with the laughter because there's no point, there's nobody to listen to you. So laughter and the knowledge that other people are finding it funny is part of it. I mean, that's also, of course, why if you miss the joke and you don't get it and everybody is laughing and you're sat there going, I don't get it, because I was trying to say Infantini, but then I forgot the name of the bloody football manager because I'm
trying to forget him all the time.
Well, I go out for drinks with my mates and they're making jokes about football and I'm sitting there thinking, right, I have to time carefully when I'm going to do the laughter thing because I need to. Laughter is a social signal to other people. It's a thing. And you're laughing at the baring of the teeth. It's a social thing. So what good comedians do is they slightly anticipate what you're going to be thinking and they subvert it and they're just ahead of you and they do it in a way that's friendly and containing rather than nasty and abusive. And one of the things I don't want to name comedians that I don't like, but I think one of the things about the Goodies and closely related to the Goodies was the Monty Python people. Their membership was closely related. Is very little of their humour was nasty and attacking and making fun of other people. So they were taking you with the humour, and you were sort of embraced in the humour.
There was an absurdity, wasn't there? It was just a wonderful, childish humour, which, absolutely.
Kittens.
But equally, isn't it true that the dog's tail wagging, they don't do that if they're not in front of humans. They only do that as a signal to humans to say they're happy.
Well,
there you go. So it must be a similar thing. Laughter and tail wagging must have something in common.
And this comes back to Albert Camus and the kind of fundamental, the biological rootedness of it. All we're doing, and what we're doing now in a sophisticated form, is we're just playing out our biological and evolutionary destiny. That's all we're doing.
Great, lovely. Well, we can condense it all down into that. In honour of Bill Oddie, we also need to just make sure that we have you doing the funky gibbon.
Yeah, I'll put that onto the agenda for a future.
Okay, we'll come back to that. Concept of the week then, Peter. Each week we like to give people a little bit of knowledge about psychology. What concept can you tell us about this week?
So the concept of the week is confirmation bias. It's pretty simple and a lot of people know about it. And I'm just going to add a political point to it, I suppose, which is, so what happens, and it's almost certainly, again, rooted in the evolutionary past, is once we believe something, we search for evidence that confirms our bias. And if you think about bees, if a bee goes and finds some honey, the logical thing to do is to go back to the honey, not to think, I wonder if there's something else somewhere else. You go back to where you've come from. So once you've come up with an answer to a question, you're likely to look for evidence to confirm it. And that probably has many evolutionary advantages, but it leads us into all sorts of blind alleys. I think that relates to climate change and wildfires, and it's particularly bad right now. We are particularly prone to a combination of confirmation bias, where we are pre-programmed to search for evidence that reinforces our prejudices, and algorithms on social media that make it very, very easy to find evidence that supports our prejudices. And of course, things like ChatGPT make it even worse, because you come up with something which is wrong and unhelpful and prejudicial, and then you type into ChatGPT, could you please find some evidence to support my prejudice, please?
Yes.
And ChatGPT says, what a wise and sensible person you are, Hillary. I have searched the internet and I have found, out of the 400 million pieces of evidence that proves you wrong, in order to wag my tail and please you, I'll find 3 bits of evidence on some obscure, mad website to prove you right. And then we're convinced climate change, there will be people out there who've been to some mad-ass website which shows we really don't have to worry about it, despite what we could see if we just look out of our window.
It's those echo chambers coming back to haunt us over and over again. Thank you for that.
Confirmation bias, be careful about it. It'll kill you.
Literally. Triple T, please, then. The tip to try. What bite-sized chunk of well-being can you help us with this week?
Okay, so this is a bit of a big concept, but it's an easy thing to do, which is just ask yourself, why am I doing this? What goal is this serving? What am I aiming for here? So you can find yourself at a party and think, is there any reason for me to stay? Or maybe I'll go early night and law of diminishing returns. And should I have another? If everybody's getting around, should I have another drink? And what do I want out of this? So asking, what is it that I genuinely want here? When you're in a conversation with people, and like I was saying before, if you're in a conversation with people and you're a bit anxious, then you think to yourself, what is it that I want out of this conversation? Do I want to look clever? When somebody's telling an anecdote, do you think, oh, I want to beat them with an anecdote? Do I want to show how clever I am? Do I want to point out that I'm more intelligent or richer than them? So you just ask yourself, what is it that I want here? And if you want the other person to feel good about the afternoon, you might make a slightly different decision. What do I want here? Do I want to burn my skin? Do I want to sit in the shade and enjoy it? Do I want to just watch and have a pleasant afternoon? Do I want to eat so much that I feel uncomfortable? What is it that I wanted out of this?
I often want that. But it is something I also recommend to people that I train as well. Before they go into a meeting, instead of just saying what you think you need to be saying, you should sit down and think, what do I want to achieve out of this?
Exactly.
And then that really helps clarify what information you impart, because you've actually got a reason for being there. And you actually end up being much more influential as a result. So I wholeheartedly agree with your tip to try this week from a well-being perspective, but also from a business perspective. You'll end up being a lot more efficient, definitely.
If you focus on what your goals are, you're more likely to achieve your goals.
Yeah, absolutely. If you have liked what we've been discussing this week, then perhaps you could give us a review. We'd like that very much, and get in touch with us and ask us what else is going on and give us some ideas about what we should be covering. We will be back next week, Peter, with more handy hints and concepts and news headlines to psychoanalyze. I hope you have a lovely week. Thank you very much. The Experience podcast is hosted by Hilary Jeffs and Peter Kinderman, produced by James Jones at Granary Digital. You can find us on social media, and you can get in touch via email at hello@experiencepodco.com with any questions, comments or topics you'd like us to cover. And don't forget to leave us a review.